Hi, I'm Penny, and this is my 2 cents on being imperfect as a parent and someone who struggled with eating disorders both in childhood and again after becoming a parent. This podcast mentions details about eating disorders and suicide. If you or someone you know needs support in Canada, call or text 988 for 24/7 suicide support or reach out to the National Eating Disorder Information Center at 1-866-633-4220. Did you know the word imperfect comes from the Latin imperfectus, meaning incomplete? That's how old this idea is, this westernized belief that to be complete, we must be perfect. It's deep, it's generational, and whether we realize it or not, many of us pass it on to our kids. Not because we want to, but because we were taught the same. This podcast is about breaking that cycle. We're bringing experts to the table to talk openly about child and youth wellness, especially mental health, in today's world of modern parenting. And we're not shying away from hard truths. Perfectionism is a real danger. It's fueling anxiety, burnout, and a sharp rise in disordered eating among children. But it doesn't stop there. The pursuit of perfection, often modeled by adults, is taking a heavy toll on kids' mental health in more ways than one. Now, let me be clear. Embracing imperfection doesn't mean raising kids to be careless. It means teaching them how to strive with heart, but also how to fall without shame. It means helping them hold space for both effort and humanity. Because we all have limits, and with AI filters and curated social media content, our kids are growing up in a world that punishes imperfection more than ever before. If we're serious about protecting children's mental health, we need to let go of the idea of perfection, not just in our kids, but in ourselves, because they're always watching, always listening, and what we model, they absorb. Here's a story. My mom was a teacher before I was born. When I got an A in school, she'd smile and say, "Good job. What could you have done better to get an A plus?" By 7th grade, I was top of my class in a middle-class neighborhood and a perfectly average East Coast public school. By 8th grade, I dropped rank to 3rd place in my class. It was the same year puberty rushed in, and not long after that, so did the kind of anorexia that no one sees. It's called atypical anorexia, making it harder for adults to spot the problems underneath because it's just not visible on the outside. And by high school graduation with a multi-layered inner world, I finished with what should have been a proud 85% average or a 3.7 GPA. But in my mind, I'd failed. The farther I fell from the top, the deeper I sank into self-criticism. That's the power of perfectionism, and it doesn't go away with age. The best career advice I've ever received: just start. The worst: fake it till you make it. That one's landed me in more trouble than I care to admit. So I'm starting right here, right now. This podcast isn't polished, it's not perfect, but that's kind of the point. I've spent most of my life keeping my thoughts to myself. Late bloomer in more ways than one, especially when it comes to learning how to speak up for myself and using my true inner voice. It's never too late to change direction as a parent, and it's never too late to raise resilient kids or to raise ourselves into the parents we needed. Thanks for being here. My first guest, Karen Flello, joined me on June 27th. Today's conversation is one that holds deep personal meaning for me and for anyone across British Columbia who might remember Michelle Stewart, a former health communications professional who touched many by candidly sharing her 32-year battle with a dual eating disorder in her blog. Michelle lived with both anorexia and bulimia for over 3 decades until she passed away from organ failure at the age of 49 in 2014. Her story is one of brilliance, pain, and resilience. I understand that with Michelle's permission, her partner, Kirk Mason, a radio broadcaster based in Victoria, BC, and Karen, our guest today, made the powerful decision to share Michelle's private journals and reflections in a posthumous book entitled Shell. Through entries written in the final year of her life, Michelle offers a rare and honest view of what it's like to live for decades with an eating disorder that began in adolescence, around the age of 16. Reading from the inside back cover of Shell, Michelle dedicated her working life to raising awareness around issues of public concern. After a decade as a news reporter in radio that ended with her hosting an open line show in Prince George, she built a long-time career in public sector communications. Michelle served for 7 years as Director of Communications for the British Columbia Ministry of Health before launching her own communications company in 2012. I'm honored to be speaking with Michelle's sister, Karen Flello, the Executive Director of NIED, the National Initiative for Eating Disorders. Karen is here with me today, not only as Michelle's sister, but as an advocate, educator, and leader, working to help rewrite the future for those facing eating disorders through the powerful lens of the caregiver. Together, we're going to talk about Michelle as an adult and an adolescent, to the best of Karen's memory, maybe learn more about what Karen thinks was missed by the systems meant to protect Michelle and her loved ones, and what families might be able to do today to help change the outcome, as well as what life as the caregiver looks like. Karen, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, Penny.
Okay, a quick little backstory of how I came to learn about Michelle for myself. I just wanted to say that for me, it's one of those, the universe has its way of pulling the right people together in kind of moments, and it keeps whispering at you if you ignore it until it finally shouts at you. So I can't remember if I told you this when we first met, Karen, but I picked up the book Shell at a time in, maybe not in this much detail. I picked it up in a time in my agency career when I really badly wanted to be on the creative side again, but I was on the client side in a business development role, handling relationships and budgets. And I was the go-to between clients and creatives. And honestly, as a part of me was dead on the inside because I let my creative self go in exchange for a bigger paycheck. Meaning that no agent, yeah, like it happens, right? Life happens and you just,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I was really, no one was going to hire me for my visual creative skills, but somehow I ended up landing an account role, which was paying me a lot more than the graphic design jobs that I was getting. And I had a little girl to raise. Brian and I had a little girl to raise in Vancouver, of all places. So I forced myself to step into those agency roles. So around 2016, I was in the middle of a dark period, experiencing some of my own brain pain, as I call it, and another round of imposter syndrome, which wasn't uncommon for me. And after years of self-doubt of my own visual creative capabilities, I tried to tap into my creative writing side. So I figured I'd take a vacation from the agency, and I bought into this one-day course. I took a vacation day, I should say. And I bought into this one-day course on how to pitch books or magazine ideas to publishers, or how to get published or something like that. And that's where I met one of the presenters, who was Maggie Langrick, who of Lifetree Media at the time. And I understand that she published Shell.
She did.
Yeah.
She did. Yeah.
Yeah. And so last little bit, and then I'll get into some my questions for you, Karen, but fun fact, for any Gen Xers who are seeing or listening to this, Maggie Langrick was an actor at 14 years old. And after a big break around 16, I read this recently because you blogged about it.
Harry and the Hendersons.
Pardon me?
Harry and the Hendersons.
Yeah, Harry and the Hendersons.
Yeah.
With John Lithgow in 1987.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so friends of ours were looking to watch it over the Christmas break this year. And because we're all, in that Gen X era, and somebody came up with the idea that this would be a fun 80s flick to watch. And I looked at their credits and I said, wait a second, I had no idea that was the same Maggie that you and I would know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was standing at her table of books at that publishing event that I attended in 2016 when I read the front cover of Shell. And as soon as I did, I knew I had to have it. I felt that I understood Michelle's struggles personally before I even read the book, and I've kept it on my nightstand with a small collection of other books that I, feel that are close to my heart. And I originally reached out to you because I wanted permission to mention Shell in the work of Reframe Voices as I move forward, and um, as I was exploring this whole gap in the system of healthcare as it relates to eating disorders awareness. Um, and lastly, that's how I found you on LinkedIn and
Mhm.
learned about where you've been for the last few months, which is the role of executive director for the National Initiative for Eating Disorders, which we'll talk about Karen's organization NIED in a bit. But first, let's honor Michelle's story.
Thank you.
So, my first question of you, Karen, is what is the age difference between you and your sister, or who is the older sister and by how much?
Yeah. I was the elder sister, and we we used to be bizarrely proud of the fact that we were 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days apart. So
Oh,
yeah, yeah. So she was just over 2 years younger than I. So when she was 16 and beginning this journey, I was 18 and just about to graduate high school.
okay.
Mhm.
So it's interesting, and I don't know. That must have been hard because you were the older sister, so you would have, whenever it was that you started to catch on to what was happening, how how did you start to see signs? And as her older sister, what was that like for you?
Um, well, the early signs, because Michelle's, stealth mode with respect to her eating disorder behaviors weren't, they weren't developed right at the start. So there was lots of evidence. There was, and her original symptoms had to do with binging and purging. So large quantities of certain foods would disappear. There would be evidence in the bathroom that she'd been throwing up when we knew she wasn't ill. She did it at other places. So, for example, she would be babysitting, and, once the kids were in bed, she'd engage in that behavior. And so, she was sitting for a friend of my mom's, and the friend mentioned it to mom that she was concerned. So those were the kinds of things that we saw. And at the time, um, things weren't known, and we had a degree of buying into that idea that it's a behavior, not an illness, because we weren't seeing any other signs of illness per se. But I remember one really vivid moment when I thought, okay, this is beyond not normal. We'd gone shopping, and I got an ice cream. She had stopped eating in public by this time, which was not really obvious, but I, sort of piecing it together in the background, and in hindsight, I figured that out. But I wanted to go in and look at a shirt or something and couldn't take the ice cream into the store. So she said, "Oh, I'll hold it for you." And I popped in and popped out. And in the time I'd been in there, she had let the ice cream run down her hand rather than lick it in public.
Oh,
So, that for me was the biggest thing, because at the time, limiting what you ate, like that was just part of our culture. and
yep.
and choosing things, and the binging and purging was new, and then the ice cream was kind of the final, there's something seriously wrong here, it's not
Yeah.
just behavior. So that was that
Yeah.
was what twigged it for me.
Yeah. That's really, and good on you for seeing that. Uh, I have heard a story recently of an older sister who is currently a youth, and her younger sister actually is about the same age difference that you and Michelle were, and it is hard for her to sort of start being. I think she's in. intuitive enough to be concerned as well, similar
Mhm.
to what you would have been at the time, given the signs that, limited information that you would have had back then, and same for this young person today, just feeling that sort of sensitivity to something's up, but we can't quite put our fingers on it. So
Mhm.
yeah, more around what it was that you saw, that triggered it for you. But outside of those types of connections for you, being as close to you to her as you were, what else do you remember about Michelle as a teenager? Just any like special stories that you want to cover?
Michelle was so smart, and she had such a wicked, um, unfortunately quite self-deprecating, but a wicked sense of humor. She was so funny and so quick. I remember her in those days. You got perms, and she got a particularly bad one, and showing up at a friend's house with a paper bag over her head with "perm victim" written across the front.
Did
She
you say perm victim?
perm victim.
Oh,
Yeah,
I could have had one of those too. I was definitely a
very.
perm victim.
So was I. And then people said, well, go back and get them to fix it. Why would I go back? That's who did this to me. But anyway, yeah. So she, she was, she had a heart as big as all outdoors. It put her in some vulnerable positions at times. um, you know, and it was, and for better for worse, her best friend was a tall, gorgeous model, who she was continually, comparing herself to. And Michelle had so much to offer. She was really pretty. She did not need to be fussing about this, from a appearance perspective, but of course it wasn't about appearance. It was about so much more. And yeah, I mean, she was so kind and so loving and so smart and so insecure. And that, we had a significant loss. Our father died when she was 3 and I was 5. And
Yeah,
our dad, who raised us from the time we were 6 and 8, our stepdad was our dad.
yeah,
He did raise us, and he's an amazing man. But it was a loss at a time that was hard to explain to little kids. Why has this person left us? And I don't know, because in those days you didn't get help. You certainly
yeah,
didn't get help for kids. Kids bounce back. That's what they do.
yeah.
Made of rubber. So in the end, she had a lot of early trauma
Mhm.
that we now can talk about, but at the time, those words weren't even in our vocabulary.
Right.
If well, she did live up to so much of her potential. And if she could
Yeah,
have done that without the demons, that would have been such a gift.
yeah, absolutely. And I guess that kind of triggers me to one of the other questions that I had. Um, in fact, not even a question. I'm going to jump into a quote from the book that I wanted to refer to because, to your point about capabilities versus managing demons,
Mhm.
there is an entry which was June 29th, that I've specifically opened up, and I want to read from it from the bookshelf. Saturday, June 29th. And just remind me, this is 2013. This was written
2013. Yeah.
2013. So, this passage resonated for me quite a bit with some of the struggles that I had been through off and on in my life, and when I read it, it really hit hard. So, short passage, but I will read it to your point, because she speaks of this in her own journaling. The comic Louis C.K., sorry, it's called Hunger Pains. The comic Louis C.K. has said, "The meal is not over when I'm full. The meal is over when I hate myself." This rather morbidly describes my relationship with food, writes Michelle. Imagine if every decision of every day where food is concerned were to trigger a stressful round of mental gymnastics. A simple discussion around going for coffee turns into a complicated negotiation. What size coffee? And will there be a temptation with that? How many calories are allowed? All day long, every day, complex calculations rage on, tallying what has already been consumed and what is likely to follow, plotting how many hours must go by before the next food battle must be fought. And then there are moments of surrender, which is always followed by panic over what has been consumed. I have often wondered how much of my energy has gone towards, sorry, this is a part that gets me. Uh, Stop. I have often wondered how much of my energy has gone toward trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy and what I might have done with it had it been directed towards something useful. Of course, you can learn very quickly that none of this is really about food. It is a symptom of a different problem, and yet the symptom never goes away. So I'll stop there.
Mhm.
It's
Never goes away. It's, um, I mean, we know what she was able to do was tremendous. You know, I can't imagine the incandescence if she wasn't always also focusing on that other piece. Um,
Mhm.
and you know, um, not to lessen Michelle's situation, but the rest of us were also always in a, there's a family dinner. What can we serve? How can we serve it? What is it gonna, what's gonna happen? What's gonna be what do we have to do in this celebration ahead of time? Because we know as soon as the meal is over, she's going to have to leave. I mentioned earlier, her generosity and her heart is big as all outdoors. And she got she had a reputation for, she was notorious for running away and picking up the bill. If you went out for coffee with her, if you went out for lunch with her, if her whole staff, she would always run out and pick up the bill. And what nobody else knew was that gave her also the opportunity to go out and purge.
Yeah.
Because it was masked, and I don't mean to minimize the generosity of the act, because it was, but it also gave her an out.
Yeah.
Every time. So yeah, the machinations in her brain, how to manage these things. When she was in a hospice, when she was in her end days, part of the deal was no food comes into this room that we don't, the family will provide, because that's who she's going to ask.
Hmm.
And until she couldn't walk, she was still getting herself to the bathroom to purge. And I
Wow.
can tell you she was taking nothing in, coffee and a half a scone a day kind of thing.
Wow, Karen.
And 5 days before she passed, in the 1600s, we'd have said the demons left, because we got, ironically, 16-year-old Michelle back.
Wow.
Yeah, the life, the light, the gratitude, the energy that she wasn't spending on figuring out the food negotiations. And her partner calls it our 5 days in May.
Ah, that's
Yeah,
beautiful. Yeah,
yeah,
that's beautiful. Feels like a reference to Blue Rodeo if I'm catching on.
totally.
Yeah. Okay.
He worked for a rock station. It's totally a blue
Oh,
rodeo.
that's right. Oh, yeah, of course.
Yep.
Um, wow. So interesting, because I did actually attend one of NEED's webinars I think in May or in the last month or so. I learned so much about the caregiver role, and especially in families, when when there's young families, and if it's a um whatever age they are, I should say, but definitely when there's kids involved or youth involved, and they are surrounding themselves with the needs of caregiving of the individual who's struggling with an eating disorder. What I learned about that scenario for them was just how much the family has to work around the individual to support them. But of course, when there are other siblings involved and they are also, children or youth, I learned so much about how that impacts their mental health. And it really kind of blew me away to consider it from their perspective.
Mhm.
So thank you for that webinar. And it was incredibly eye-opening about how really these are not individual scenarios, especially when it involves children and youth, but it obviously involves family members, parents, guardians, maybe multi-generational families, definitely siblings if there are any, and it's a whole family ordeal.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It is. Absolutely.
So you've answered some of the questions that I forwarded in advance. I might just skip past, about when you felt it began. Um, in Is there anything though in terms of those early signs, in hindsight, knowing what you know now, that in today's society that stand out any differently, that you would answer differently than what we've been talking about so far?
I think, one of the things um, that has changed since Michelle was ill at the beginning. At the time, fitness was a big thing, and so one of the things you might have watched out for was excessive exercising. But in later times, we have had so much more about nutrition and so much more about um, you know understanding what the body needs and the chemistry of it and the vitamins and all that kind of thing, that I think the one thing that might have been helpful, because she loved to cook. She was very interested in food and stuff like that. And lots of people love to cook. Lots of people are interested in nutrition. Lots of people are interested in exercise, and all of those things are good
Hmm.
until they're not. And
Hmm.
so it's keeping an eye on those things that um, might seem to have gone past, if you will, what feels normal. And the feeling is so important. You can defend all day long from a logical perspective that it's really good to be interested in nutrition,
Hmm.
but when you're so interested in nutrition that you can rattle off a calorie count of 75 different foods, that's not interest. That's concern.
Yeah.
So I think just it's so much of our attitude medically, if you will. We joke about the hypochondriacs who run to the doctor for every little thing. We believe it's good to let things run their course and see if they'll resolve on their own. And specifically when we're talking about mental illness, that can go on just for way too long. We do get to a point of absolute desperation, because it's not resolving, and we don't know what to do next. And if we look at those things and pay attention to our own guts as we're observing the behavior of our loved ones, ironically, our guts are telling us something for a reason. And paying attention and having those kind of hard conversations. Our NIED's National Youth Council has created or is putting the finishing touches on a resource for having those hard conversations. And it's come from young people with lived experience who kind of say, if they had said this, if they had said that, those kinds of things. So I think trusting your gut, recognizing that something that may have started out really seemingly well intended, quite innocuous, that has tripped over the edge. If you're worried about it, there's probably a reason for
Yeah.
that. And so trust yourself and find out a bit more, and be willing to have those hard conversations. And they're hard. They are really hard. Um,
That's
but
yeah.
so important.
Well, and that's a great place, and thank you to NIED for putting together those resources, and from a youth perspective, and that's definitely an area where, as we get into it with Reframe Voices Society, where I wish to tap into our youth council and schools council and clinical psychotherapy to try to continue that and share resources with one another so that we can continue these conversations. You brought up a really good point though with regards to listening to your gut. If you're concerned about someone in your family, or a spouse, or a friend, though I will get back to some data that I have found that approximately 75 to 80% of eating disorders do begin in childhood. And
Yeah.
so, to your point about listening, when someone, say a parent or guardian, will listen to their gut about what I call invisible struggles, um, if especially if if a teenager or child, or even in Michelle's case, who I would say, appeared to others to be quite high functioning, or appeared to have it all together, um, but someone suspects something is off. um, how, might you approach those conversations sensitively? Just if there's anything, I know that you've developed the materials and that's coming out, and not to put you on the spot, but is there, because I was put on the spot, I think, with CBC when they interviewed me, and it was a bit, yeah, nerve-wracking to have the answer, because of course I should have said that, as they look towards the workshops that we're developing for the fall, going into schools, that they should come to us at that point. But in a moment, I definitely spoke about being brave enough, and you mentioned courage, I think, and that is it. Like, you have to have the courage to go into, what a friend of mine referred to as the dark kid cave, because I didn't realize, that just because of the mental gymnastics that I've gone through my entire life, just to exist, I didn't realize how difficult it was for others to go into the dark cave. And I felt, as a parent, that was my responsibility from day one, to constantly check in with my daughter. And so I did not realize that, in fact, it's not the natural go-to for, everyone, every parent, to just think like, oh, well, they're having a problem. Let's sit down and get right down to the nitty gritty and understand from the child's perspective why. And you did lay out the groundwork earlier when you referred to the era that we grew up in, which is Gen X. Of those conversations just didn't happen. I remember I remember it being more of a, it's better to be seen and not heard childhood, especially as a
Mhm.
female. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was, just pulling off of what you said about being courageous, to go into that dark cave. I was curious to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I think one of the gifts that we are being given now, I mean, I think, personally, it feels like the pendulum has swung a little bit far, as it always does. It has to find its equilibrium. But we are now coming to a place of focusing, I think, on resilience, and recognizing that, you know, it's we can get stuck talking about how hard things are, and those kinds of things. But what we really have to do is bring it back to that place of, you know, once we understand that, to find ways to cope, to be resilient in the face of those things. So if we're talking to, and Penny, your point is absolutely bang on, these eating disorders, the things that we saw in later teens are happening earlier and earlier. And I think having the ability to have those conversations about big feelings, and as the adults, with our children, to be able to be the people who, it's our job not to, to help them navigate the big feelings, not to just either ignore that they're there, or say they'll get over them, or leave them to figure it out for themselves, but to help them navigate those big feelings. There is a trust that's built that may, one hopes, make those conversations and joining them in that dark cave a little easier. Because if you're going to listen, and you're going to, provide them with the kind of supports that they need, to find strength within themselves, that the earlier you can establish that, the better.
Mhm.
And that does help. But you're right. There are lots of people, culturally, what we're seeing a lot of, in young people is, in certain cultures, we don't talk about that kind of thing. In
Yes.
certain cultures, you suck it up and get on with it.
Yeah.
In certain cultures, and
Mhm.
certainly, even as we maybe make some strides forward, in Canada, in North America, we are multicultural, and not everybody has the same kind of family dynamic at home, where there's that kind of trust,
Yeah.
kind of comfort. And there are a lot of parents who have a hard time as well, and so it can be hard. One of the recent webinars we had a mom talking about her own struggles, and how her kids are actually fine, but how does she have conversations that don't make the kids feel responsible,
Hmm.
but allow them to see the kinds of things that might be warning signs down the road for themselves.
Hmm.
It's also tricky, and because we're all just smart humans, where we're leaping to the next thing and the next
Yeah.
thing, and you
Yeah.
know, it's like, and some of those leaps aren't in the right direction, but we can't know that.
Of course, and not always in order, and yeah, there are so many different factors to take into consideration these days with the rewired childhood that this generation has, Generation Z or Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, which have followed them. I believe those are roughly 12-year olds and under. Just so much happening, as you say, it's so fast, but it's also adults. And I read an article recently. Um, Not true. I didn't read the full article. I usually get so wrapped up in so many different articles, but this one, I read the headline and I remember thinking, oh, I need to read that article because it was about um, asking not just your teenager to pull their eyes away from their phone, but the parents as well, because of course we take work home with us. We are trying to do our best to keep up in a very, very fast-paced society. And in the first video that I launched Reframe Voices with, as a call to action for why we need to pay attention at this point in time, I referred to busy parents, and I mean that genuinely. I have been one of them. And it's just that busyness which often takes our mind in different directions, and our kids are witness to that. And so this headline that I saw resonated strongly for me because I felt, oh my gosh, like how much am I, being in that busyness phase of my working life just to make ends meet versus or to socially interact, versus how much am I spending connecting with my child especially during her teenage years, when she pushes back and sometimes doesn't seem to need me, but in fact that's just the time of being a teenager. Of course she needs me and always will. So
Exactly.
yeah. So let me, as I'm jumping around the questions, let me just ask you to get towards wrapping up, because I want to give you an opportunity to say anything that you felt that you hadn't been asked in this conversation. What gives you hope with the work that you're doing right now? And what gives you hope in this field? And how does that hope shape how you support others through need?
I always say that eating disorders thrive in isolation, in darkness. It is a private thing that you hide from other people. It is a private thing that a family hides from other families, sometimes from their own family, the extended family. How do you explain to Auntie Susan that, or Christmas dinner isn't going to be quite the same this year? So what is giving me hope is the fact that even though we may not have it right quite yet, we are talking, we are sharing, we are bringing this out of the shadows. These little mushrooms of eating disorders are not going to be able to grow in the full light of day. And it took a long time for us to come to a place where we could say honestly that we did the best we could for Michelle, and sadly it didn't result in her recovery. But Maya Angelou said, I did that when I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better.
Mm.
What I know better now is that talking, sharing, connecting, bringing things out into the light, those things are going to make a difference.
Mhm.
And so, what you are doing in Reframe Voices, to bring this forward, to bring it to a place where, and it's complex, connecting to schools, connecting to places where you can have influence over children. I mean, it's sensitive and it's complex, and there's a
Mhm.
lot of stuff that needs to be negotiated and navigated. But I think that hope is going to come from, well, my hope is coming from a place of sharing and opening up communication. And I think that will, we hope, include raising awareness with the decision makers and the people with the pocketbooks, to help, eating disorders, other than opioid addiction, eating disorders have the highest level of mortality of any mental illness. But because it's not, you died from your eating disorder, you died from the conditions that are the result of years of not, providing enough nutrients to your body. So it's, Michelle didn't die of anorexia. She died of organ failure.
Yeah.
And how the public record shows it, but that's not what did it. What did it was the eating disorders. So I think as we bring it to the open, and that's, our work in NIED with respect to the advocacy. And we've veered a little bit off because there are so many amazing organizations doing amazing work for the people who are suffering eating disorders. And we are recognizing, those caregivers who need to get their oxygen mask on first before they can help the person to them. And so, that's a place where we're trying to open up as well, because it's also families losing other family contacts. It's entire, little tiny ecosystems of a family of 3 or 4 or 5 that are now no longer doing things with other families that they used to do all the time. And it's hard. It's really hard. It's hard work. And so if those people, those caregivers can have support, then they will have a little bit more in their own buckets to be able to support their loved one. And so that gives me hope, and that's how it's changing what I do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining NIED, and thank you for bringing that work to the light of day for others in your field of work. So it makes perfect sense that you'd be doing this based on your history with Michelle. And one last little story. I did not share this with you, I'm sure, when we first met, but then I realized this as a result of looking forward to this conversation. And of course, June being the month that I lost my stepsister, Heather, to her dual anorexia and bulimia. In fact, when I put together the launch video, I asked my stepmother for permission to reference her, because it didn't fully, I'm not sure why, but it didn't fully occur to me. This all happened very fast for me when I brought this together, but then the reference to Heather made perfect sense, because what I was seeing, and then being who I am, taking it to that cognitive behavioral therapy and worst case scenario for those who I'm concerned with right now in the youth category, and then looking at Michelle's story, and then all of it coming together, I thought, oh my gosh, like, this is Heather's story too. She she was 16 when I met her. I was 13. Her parents got married, my father, her mother. Her case is quite different, I believe, than Michelle's, but she did struggle quite a bit with some parental abandonment. And ultimately, she was bipolar, but her mother did not know that about her growing up. Yeah, so that's like a coexisting or comorbidity, as they say in the medical field, but the coexisting mental illness, which would have, changed her hormone levels. Also being female, it would have changed her the way that those hormone levels interacted with her brain, and her, as you talk about the mortality rate for her by the age of 33. Was already quite painfully addicted to illicit drugs, and struggled, and ultimately she passed away at 33. We lost her, and in the month of June, in 10 years before, you lost Michelle in 2004, and she was a sweet individual, very, very shy, incredibly insecure, and I adored her. And whenever I think about, of course, we don't want that worst case scenario to happen, what happened with Michelle, and she lived a long life. I mean, but still, I mean, I'm older now than she was when she passed. And so I think of that, and I think of your pain of having lost her, and that's devastating. And I was not close with my stepsister, which is probably why I struggled to connect those dots in the beginning. But when I did, I realized the pain of her mother as a mother, and I had so much empathy for my stepmother for having lost her only daughter,
Mhm.
and so young at 33. And so there are so many, you talk about complexity and I talk about the biopsychosocial. These are things that parents of young children, don't necessarily start thinking of when the little one is growing up. You don't think about, oh, what's my genetic family history or what is happening in our family right now, which could be causing some like little T traumas or big T traumas. And well, either way, and so all of that information for me is part of this educational piece. It's the dynamics of family and whatnot. And again, like if my stepmother did not know that her daughter was genetically predisposed to her ex-husband's bipolar disorder,
Right.
then how could she possibly know that this is what she was, trying to help her daughter manage with? And so it's a very complex illness,
Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with talking about it. Just like a broken leg needs to be fixed, we can work on broken brains. And I just wanted to say thank you for talking with me today about all of this. It's a very sensitive topic. And last question, is there anything that you feel I didn't ask that you would like to talk about?
I think um, I think you asked about hope, and the other piece for me is that we are, we know, and Michelle wrote about the fact that illnesses have a pecking order. There are things that get attention, and there are things that just don't. There are things that people think you can just get over, and 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 it has to do with a quick return on investment. I hate to put it in those terms, but a broken leg, you can splint it, you can reset it, you have it in a cast for a while, it's fixed. Cancer, if it's caught early, you can cut it out and take some drugs and you will be cured. But something like a mental illness, whatever mental illness it might be, can have a very, very long recovery time. And so it doesn't have the cachet of a quick return on investment. We spent
Yeah.
$10 million last year and 75 people got better. It doesn't work that way. But I think if we can recognize the value in the long game,
Hmm.
um, I think, and so what you are doing, what we are doing, what all of the organizations are doing in bringing awareness of eating disorders and the realities of those to individuals and families. I think it's brilliant work. It's important work, and if we keep doing it, I believe there's hope
Yeah.
for the people who are going to come after us,
Me
who
too.
who are in need of that support. So
Yeah. Thank
thank you for everything you're doing to bring it forward as well. That's
thank you,
really
Karen. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate your time today.
my pleasure.
Okay.